I wasn't looking for forgiveness when I opened that dusty file box in the basement of the National Archives. I was looking for a footnote, just a name to complete a list of casualties for a book that likely no one would read. The fluorescent light above my head flickered with a maddening buzz, casting long, shivering shadows across the concrete floor. It was raining outside, a relentless November downpour that battered the small basement windows, but inside, the air was dry, smelling of decaying paper and forgotten history. I pulled out a folder marked Incident 402, Classified, a stamp that had been crossed out with a thick black marker only 3 weeks ago. My hands, usually steady, felt a strange chill as I untied the string. Inside, there wasn't a stack of bureaucratic reports. There was a single yellowed envelope sealed with wax that had cracked decades ago, and a photograph clipped to a discharge paper. The paper was standard military issue from 1952, cold and final. It read, Arthur Vance, rank corporal, discharge, dishonorable, reason, cowardice in the face of the enemy. I stared at the word. Cowardice. It was a stain that destroyed bloodlines, a label that buried men before they were even dead. But then my eyes drifted to the photograph. It was grainy, black and white, taken perhaps days before the incident. Arthur Vance was young, his jaw set tight, his eyes looking not at the camera, but at something beyond it, something terrifying. And tucked behind the discharge paper was a handwritten note, scribbled on the back of a ration wrapper. The ink was faded, barely legible, but the message punched the air out of my lungs. It said, he didn't run. He stayed. God help us, he stayed when we all left. I felt the room spin. The official history said Arthur Vance abandoned his post, leading to the massacre of his unit. The note said he was the only reason anyone survived. I looked at the date on the file. Arthur Vance would be 96 years old today, if he was still alive, if the silence hadn't killed him yet. I grabbed my coat. I wasn't writing a book anymore. I was hunting a ghost. The drive to the Oaks of Peace nursing home took 3 hours, winding through grey, rain-slicked roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The facility was a low brick building surrounded by oak trees that had lost their leaves, their skeletal branches scratching against the grey sky. It was a place where people went to wait for the end, a warehouse for memories that no one wanted to hear. I parked my car and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. I had the file in my leather satchel. It felt heavy, heavier than paper should be. I walked into the lobby, assaulted by the smell of antiseptic, lavender air freshener, and boiling cabbage, the scent of institutionalized old age. The receptionist, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Brenda, looked up from a magazine. When I asked for Arthur Vance, she hesitated. She looked at me with a mix of suspicion and pity. Mr. Vance doesn't have visitors, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, as if speaking his name too loud would disturb the dust. He doesn't speak, you know, hasn't said a word in 5 years, not since his daughter passed. I nodded, showing my press credential, though I felt like an imposter. I just need to sit with him, I said. I believe I have something that belongs to him. She buzzed me in. I walked down the long linoleum hallway, the sound of my boots squeaking against the floor, sounding like gunshots in the quiet. Room 3B was at the end of the hall, near the fire exit. The door was open a crack. I pushed it gently. The room was small, dimly lit by the afternoon light filtering through closed blinds. In the corner, sitting in a wheelchair facing the window, was a figure that looked more like a bundle of clothes than a man. Arthur Vance. He was tiny, shrunken by gravity and time. He wore a grey cardigan that was 2 sizes too big, and a wool blanket was tucked meticulously around his legs. I stepped inside. "Mr. Vance," I whispered. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He was staring at the slats of the blinds, watching the rain. I walked around to face him. His face was a map of deep crevices, his skin translucent like parchment paper, but his eyes were startlingly blue. They weren't cloudy with age. They were sharp, alert, and filled with a profound, crushing sorrow. He looked at me, and for a second, I felt like I was being evaluated by a soldier on sentry duty. He didn't speak. He just watched. On the small table beside him, there were no photos of family, no flowers, just a plastic cup of water and a small, tarnished silver object that looked like an old pocket watch, but wasn't. It was a compass. The glass was cracked. I pulled a chair from the corner and sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence in the room was thick, almost pressurized. I could hear the hum of the radiator and the shallow, rasping rhythm of his breathing. I didn't open my bag immediately. I just looked at him. "My name is David," I said softly. "I'm a historian. I study the war." Arthur's left hand twitched. It was a subtle movement, a tremor that traveled from his wrist to his index finger. He began to tap on the armrest of his wheelchair. Tap, 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 tap. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. He didn't look at me. He kept his gaze fixed on the window. But the tapping grew slightly louder. I glanced at the compass on the table. "That's a fine piece," I said, nodding toward it. "Standard issue Mark III, or something personal." Arthur stopped tapping. His hand hovered over the armrest, freezing in midair. Slowly, painfully slowly, he turned his head to look at the compass. His hand moved, shaking violently now, and he covered the object with his palm, pulling it closer to his chest. It was a protective gesture, the way a mother shields a child. The fear in his eyes was sudden and raw. It wasn't the confusion of dementia, it was the terror of exposure. "I know about Hill 402, I said. The words hung in the air. The effect was immediate. Arthur's chest heaved. He let out a sound, not a word, but a low, guttural whimper that sounded like a wounded animal. He squeezed his eyes shut, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the compass against his heart. "I know they said you ran," I continued, my voice trembling slightly. "I know the official report calls you a coward." Arthur opened his eyes. They were wet now. He shook his head, a minute desperate motion, no. He was trying to speak, his jaw working, but no sound came out. His throat muscles tightened. It was as if the silence of 50 years had calcified his vocal cords. Suddenly the door behind me flew open. "What are you doing?" The voice was sharp, accusatory. I jumped and spun around. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, stood there. She had Arthur's jawline and fierce eyes. She was wearing scrubs and holding a grocery bag. This must be the granddaughter. She dropped the bag and rushed to Arthur's side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Grandpa, are you okay?" She glared at me, her eyes blazing with protective fury. "Who are you? Did you upset him?" Arthur was still trembling, clutching the compass. I stood up, raising my hands. "I'm sorry. I'm David Miller. I'm a researcher. I didn't mean to upset him." She checked Arthur's pulse, smoothing his thin white hair. "He shouldn't be agitated. His heart is weak. You need to leave." She turned back to Arthur, her voice softening instantly. "It's okay, Papa. I'm here. Sarah is here." But Arthur wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me over her shoulder. His gaze was intense, pleading. He wanted me to stay. I saw it. Sarah didn't see it. She only saw a confused old man. "Please," I said to her. "I have found something about his service." Sarah let out a bitter, short laugh. "His service? My grandfather was a clerk. He filed papers in a warehouse in Kansas. He never saw combat. That's what he always told us." I froze. A clerk. The file in my bag screamed otherwise. The file spoke of a frontline unit, a massacre, a court-martial averted only by a swift discharge. He had lied to them. For 50 years, he had lied to his own family to protect them from the shame, or perhaps to protect himself from the memory. Sarah, I said carefully. He wasn't a clerk. I reached into my bag and pulled out the photograph. I held it out. Sarah hesitated, then snatched it from my hand. She looked at the young man in the mud, the rifle slung over his shoulder, the 1,000-yard stare. She looked back at the frail man in the wheelchair. "This is him," she whispered. "But why would he lie?" Arthur let out a sharp breath. He reached out with his trembling hand and touched Sarah's arm. For the first time in 5 years, he opened his mouth to make a deliberate sound. It was a raspy, broken croak, like dry leaves crushing together. "The box." Sarah froze. She looked down at him. "Papa." He swallowed hard, his face red with effort. "The box. Underneath." He pointed a shaking finger toward the floor, specifically under the bed. Sarah looked at me, confused and frightened. She had never heard him speak. The shock on her face mirrored my own adrenaline. She knelt down and reached under the hospital bed. She pulled out a cardboard shoebox, taped shut with layers of duct tape that had yellowed and peeled with age. It looked like trash. It looked like something you would throw away without a second thought. She placed it on his lap. Arthur didn't open it. He pushed it toward me. His hands were shaking so bad the box rattled. He looked me in the eye, and the message was clear. "You found me. Now finish it." I looked at the box, then at Sarah. "Can I?" I asked. She nodded, mute with shock. I used a pen to slit the old tape. The cardboard groaned as I lifted the lid. Inside, the smell of stale tobacco and old leather wafted up. There was no money, no gold. There was a stack of letters, tied with twine, all addressed to Corporal Vance, but never opened, and beneath them a heavy, rusted iron key and a German Luger pistol, the barrel welded shut. But it was the object on top that made my blood run cold. It was a piece of fabric, a strip of torn, blood-soaked uniform with a patch on it. The patch of the 402nd Battalion, the Lost Battalion. And wrapped inside the fabric was a dog tag, not Arthur's. It belonged to a man named Private E. Miller, my last name. My heart hammered against my ribs. I picked up the dog tag. "Who is E. Miller?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Arthur closed his eyes, and a single tear tracked through the deep lines of his cheek. He whispered one word, clear and devastating. "Brother." Sarah gasped. "You had a brother? You said you were an only child." The mystery was deepening with every second. The man in the wheelchair wasn't just a quiet grandfather who filed papers. He was a vault of trauma. I looked at the dog tag again. E. Miller, Edward Miller. My grandfather's brother, the great-uncle who, according to my family, had vanished in the war, missing in action. My family never knew what happened to him. They assumed he died in a ditch somewhere unknown. But here was his tag, wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, in the hands of a man labeled a coward. A terrible thought crossed my mind. Did Arthur Vance run away and leave my great-uncle to die? Was that the secret? Was I staring at the man responsible for the hole in my own family history? The anger flared up, hot and sudden. I looked at Arthur with new eyes. Suspicion replaced the pity. "Did you know him?" I asked, my voice harder now. "Did you know Edward Miller?" Arthur nodded slowly. He pointed to the letters in the box. "Read," he wheezed. I picked up the first letter. It wasn't postmarked. It was written on scraps of paper, seemingly never sent. I unfolded it. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. "October 12th, 1952. We are trapped in the valley. The captain is dead. Vance is taking command. He says we have to hold the line. He says we can't leave the wounded. He is the only reason we are still breathing." I frowned. This letter was written by Edward Miller, my great-uncle, and he was writing about Vance taking command, but the official report said Vance fled. I looked at the next letter. "October 14th. No ammo left. Vance is going out tonight, alone. He says he knows a way through the lines to get help. He refuses to take anyone else. He says if he dies, it should just be him. I looked up at Arthur. He was watching me read, his expression one of agonizing vulnerability. He wasn't a coward. The letters, my great-uncle's own words, painted a picture of a man who volunteered for a suicide mission. So why the discharge? Why the shame? Why the silence? "Sarah," I said, handing her the letter, "read this." She read it, her lips moving silently, tears welling in her eyes. He was a hero?" she asked, her voice trembling. "He tried to save them?" She looked at her grandfather with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Why did they say you were a coward, Papa? Why did they take your honor?" Arthur didn't answer. He just tapped the compass again. Tap, 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 tap. I realized then what the rhythm was. It wasn't random tapping, it was Morse code. I listened closely. Dash, dot, dash, 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 dot. K, G... No, wait. It was simpler. Dot, dot, dot. Dash, dash, dash. Dot, dot, dot. SOS. He had been signaling distress for years, tapping it on his chair, and no one had understood. "He's signaling for help," I whispered. "He's been trapped in that valley for 50 years. I turned to the bottom of the box. There was something else. A small black audio reel. The kind used in old wire recorders. It was taped to the bottom of the box with a label that said, "Do not play. Warning." I looked at Arthur. He saw the reel and his eyes widened in panic. He reached out, trying to grab it, but his strength failed him. "Burn it!" he rasped. "Burn it!" Why would he want to burn the evidence that could exonerate him? Unless the tape contained something worse than cowardice, unless the truth was darker than I could imagine. "I can't burn it, Arthur," I said gently. "We need to know." I looked around the room. There was no player for a wire reel, but I knew someone who could digitize it. "Sarah," I said, standing up, "I need to take this. I can have the audio extracted by tomorrow. This is the key. This tells us what happened on Hill 402. Sarah looked at her grandfather, who was now weeping silently, his head bowed, defeated. She looked at me. "If this hurts him," she warned. "It will hurt," I admitted. "The truth always hurts, but the lie is killing him." She nodded slowly. "Take it, but you come back. You come back and you play it for us first." I put the reel in my bag, along with the letters. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. I walked to the door but stopped. I turned back to Arthur. "I'll be back, Corporal," I said, using his rank. He lifted his head. For a brief second, the frailty vanished. He straightened his spine. He gave me a single slow nod. It wasn't a nod of permission. It was a nod of a man facing a firing squad. The audio lab was a soundproof box buried in the basement of the university, a place where time seemed to stand still. I sat there for 4 hours, watching the audio technician, a guy named Marcus with thick glasses and endless patience, carefully spool the brittle wire onto a custom spindle. The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that grated on my nerves. Every minute felt like an hour. I kept checking my phone, expecting a call from Sarah, expecting bad news. Finally, Marcus spun his chair around. "I've got it," he said, rubbing his eyes. "The quality is garbage, lots of magnetic decay, but I managed to isolate the vocal frequencies. You want to hear it through the monitors or headphones?" "Headphones," I said immediately. I wanted this to be intimate. I wanted to hear the ghosts clearly. I put the heavy cans over my ears and nodded. Marcus hit the spacebar. At first, there was just a wash of static like the sound of heavy rain on a tin roof. Then a pop. Then the sound of heavy breathing. It was close to the microphone, ragged and wet. A voice cut through the white noise. "October 15th, 0300 hours. Position compromise." It was Arthur's voice, but not the rasping whisper of the old man in the wheelchair. This was a young voice, strong, but laced with terror. "We are cut off. Captain Sterling has ordered a retreat, but the wounded... God, the wounded can't move." The static swelled again, followed by the terrifying, distinctive sound of incoming mortar fire. A high-pitched shriek, followed by a dull, bass-heavy thud that distorted the audio. I flinched. Then another voice, deeper, authoritative, angry. "Corporal Vance, did you hear me? Pull the men back, now!" I paused the track. "Can you enhance that second voice?" I asked Marcus. He nodded, tweaking a few knobs on his digital board. "It's distorted, but I can boost the mid-range." He played it again. "Leave them, Vance. They're dead weight. If we don't move, we all die." My blood ran cold. The official report said Vance had panicked and run, leaving his unit to die. But the tape was recording the exact opposite. Vance wasn't running. He was being ordered to run. I pressed play again. Arthur's voice came back, shouting over the chaos. "I can't do that, sir. Miller is still breathing. Jensen is still breathing. I'm not leaving them behind." There was a scuffle, the sound of the microphone hitting something hard, then the deeper voice again, snarling this time. "If you disobey my direct order, Corporal, I will bury you. I will make sure you rot in Leavenworth. Get in the truck." Then a gunshot, close. Too close. Silence followed for 10 agonizing seconds. Then Arthur's voice, broken, weeping. "He left. He took the truck." "He left us." I took the headphones off, my hands trembling. The narrative wasn't just wrong, it was a criminal fabrication. The officer, Captain Sterling, had abandoned his men and then framed the one soldier who stayed behind to cover his own cowardice. The name Sterling rang a bell. General Robert Sterling, a war hero, a man with statues in 3 states, a man who had died a celebrated patriot 10 years ago. Arthur Vance had taken the fall for a legend. I grabbed the flash drive with the audio file. I had to get back to the nursing home. I had to play this for Sarah. I dialed her number as I ran to my car. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I drove faster than I should have, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the storm. When I pulled into the parking lot of Oaks of Peace, I saw a black sedan parked near the entrance. Government plates. 2 men in dark suits were standing by the front desk, arguing with the receptionist. My instincts screamed at me. I didn't go through the front door. I ran around the side of the building toward the fire exit near room 3B. It was locked, of course. I banged on the metal door. "Sarah, Sarah!" Nothing. I ran back to the front, pushing past the automatic doors. The scene in the lobby was chaotic. Brenda, the receptionist, looked terrified. The 2 men in suits were blocking the hallway. One of them, a tall man with a buzz cut and a face like chiseled granite, turned to me. "Sir, this facility is under temporary lockdown due to a medical emergency. You need to leave." "I'm a family friend," I lied, breathless. "Where is Arthur Vance?" "Mr. Vance is being transferred," the suit said calmly. "Transferred? Transferred where?" "Veterans Affairs Hospital for specialized care." It was a lie. I knew it. They were moving him to silence him. Someone knew I had pulled that file. The archives must have flagged the request. "You can't take him," I said, my voice rising. "He's not sick. He's in danger." The man stepped closer, invading my personal space. "Step back, sir, or you will be detained." Just then, a scream echoed from down the hall. It was Sarah. "No, let go of him! You're hurting him!" I didn't think. I shoved the suit aside. He was solid as a rock, but I caught him off balance and sprinted down the hallway. "Hey!" he shouted, giving chase. I rounded the corner to room 3B. The door was wide open. Inside, a nurse and another man in a suit were trying to lift Arthur from his wheelchair onto a gurney. Arthur was fighting them. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking struggle. He was flailing his thin arms, making those guttural sounds of distress. Sarah was pulling at the suit's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Get away from him!" I roared, bursting into the room. The distraction was enough. Sarah shoved the man back, and Arthur slumped into his chair, gasping for air, clutching his chest. The man I had shoved in the lobby caught up to me, grabbing my shoulder and spinning me around. He pinned me against the wall. "Federal agents! Stand down!" he barked. "On what grounds?" I yelled back, pinned but defiant. "You're kidnapping a 96-year-old man." "We are securing classified assets," the agent spat back. "That box. Where is the box?" They didn't care about Arthur. They wanted the tape. They knew about the wire recorder. The legacy of General Sterling was protected by a machinery that didn't stop for time. "I don't have it," I lied. "I mailed it." The agent tightened his grip on my throat. Sarah screamed, "Stop it! Leave him alone!" The tension in the room was a physical weight, pressing down on all of us. But then a sound cut through the violence. It wasn't a scream, it was a voice, clear, loud, thunderous. "At ease!" The command cracked like a whip. Everyone froze. The agent dropped his hand from my throat. We all turned to the wheelchair. Arthur Vance was sitting upright, his back straight, his chin lifted. The trembling was gone. The fog in his eyes had cleared, replaced by a steel-hard glare that could melt iron. He looked at the agents, then at me, then at Sarah. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. "Get out," he growled. The agent straightened his tie, looking uncertain for the first time. "Mr. Vance, we have orders to—" "I said, get out!" Arthur bellowed, his voice breaking on the last word but carrying a terrifying authority. "I am a witness, and I want a lawyer." The agents exchanged a look. They were prepared for a confused invalid, not a soldier standing his ground. They couldn't force him, not with witnesses, not with Sarah there. "We will be outside," the lead agent said coldly. "Nobody leaves this room with any property." They retreated into the hall, closing the door, but standing guard. The silence that followed was heavy with adrenaline. Sarah fell to her knees beside the wheelchair, sobbing into Arthur's blanket. "Oh my God, Papa! Oh my God!" Arthur placed a hand on her head, stroking her hair. He looked at me. "Play it," he whispered. "Play the tape." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the small Bluetooth speaker on the bedside table. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped it. I found the file. I pressed play. The sound of the mortar fire filled the small room. Then the voices. "Captain Sterling has ordered a retreat." Sarah lifted her head, her eyes wide. She listened to the betrayal. She heard the gunshot. She heard her grandfather weeping on the recording. The audio ended. The silence in the room was absolute. Sarah stood up slowly, her face pale, her eyes burning with a mixture of horror and realization. She looked at Arthur. "You didn't run," she whispered. "You stayed. You stayed for them." Arthur nodded, tears finally spilling over his cheeks. "Edward," he choked out, "your uncle. I couldn't save him. The truck took the morphine, taken everything." I stepped closer. "Arthur," I said gently, "Sterling is dead. He can't hurt you anymore. Why did you stay silent? Why did you let them brand you a coward for 50 years? Arthur looked down at his hands, the hands that had held a rifle, the hands that had held dying men, the hands that had surely held Sarah when she was a baby. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It wasn't old. It was a letter, dated 1953. He handed it to me. I unfolded it. It was typed on official Army letterhead, signed by Captain Robert Sterling. It was short. "If you speak, Vance, you go to prison for mutiny. And your wife, well, accidents happen to heavy sleepers. Your daughter is starting school soon, isn't she? Beautiful girl. Keep your mouth shut, and they live. Be a hero, and they die." I stared at the paper. It wasn't just shame. It was a hostage situation. He had accepted the label of coward to save his family from a monster. He had swallowed his honor, his pension, his pride, and lived in poverty and disgrace, all to ensure that Sarah's mother, and eventually Sarah, could live safely. The magnitude of his sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just sacrificed himself on the battlefield, he had sacrificed his entire life. He threatened. Mary, Arthur whispered, naming his late wife. He threatened little Julie. Sarah let out a sob that sounded like it tore her throat. My mom? He threatened my mom? She grabbed Arthur's hands and kissed them over and over again. You saved us. You saved us every single day. Arthur looked at her, and for the first time, a small, fragile smile touched his lips. It was the smile of a man putting down a heavy load after a very long march. I kept my promise, he said. But the conflict wasn't over. Outside the door, the agents were waiting. They represented the legacy that Arthur had protected with his silence. Now that the silence was broken, the backlash would be severe. I looked at the window. The rain had stopped. We can't keep this in this room, I said. If those men get that tape, it disappears forever, and so does the truth. Sarah wiped her face. She looked fierce now, a warrior inheriting her grandfather's spirit. What do we do? She asked. I have a contact at the Times, I said. If I upload this file now, it goes to their server. Once it's out, they can't touch him. I looked at Arthur. But it means a storm, Arthur. The media, the army, everything. Are you ready for that? Arthur looked at the compass on the table. He picked it up. His thumb brushed over the cracked glass. He looked at me, his blue eyes clear and resolved. I am done hiding, he said clearly. Upload it. I tapped the screen. The progress bar appeared. Uploading 10%, 20%. The door handle turned. The agents were coming back in. They must have realized what we were doing. Lock the door, I shouted. Sarah threw herself against the door just as it opened an inch, slamming it shut and throwing the deadbolt. Open this door! Federal agents! The voice shouted from the hall. They started kicking the door. Thud, thud. The wood splintered. Uploading 45%. Hold it! I yelled to Sarah. She braced her shoulder against the wood, her feet slipping on the linoleum. Arthur wheeled himself forward, jamming his wheelchair against the door to add his weight. Thud. The frame cracked, uploading 70%. They're going to break it down, Sarah screamed. I looked at the phone. 85%. Just a few more seconds, I shouted. The door buckled. A hand reached through the crack, trying to undo the lock. Sarah bit the hand. The agent yelled in pain and pulled back. Uploading 98%, 99%. Sent. It's gone, I yelled. It's out! The kicking stopped instantly. Silence returned to the hallway. They knew. In the digital age, once it's sent, it's everywhere. The agents knew the game was over. I slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor, exhausted. Sarah hugged Arthur, both of them crying. But Arthur wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest. His expression changed. The relief faded, replaced by a strange, focused intensity. He wasn't looking at the wall. He was looking through it. David, he whispered, his voice sounding distant, detached. David, look at the photo. I frowned. Which photo? The one in the box, the group photo. I scrambled over to the box and pulled out the group photo of the platoon I had glanced at earlier. I hadn't looked closely before. It showed 20 men standing in front of a truck. I saw a young Arthur Vance. I saw Edward Miller, my great-uncle, standing next to him, smiling. But then I saw something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Standing in the back row, half obscured by shadow, was a man who looked familiar. Not familiar from history books, familiar from today. I looked closer. The eyes, the jawline. It was the spitting image of the agent who had just tried to break down the door. That's, I stammered, that looks like the agent. Arthur nodded slowly. "Grandson," he whispered. "Sterling's grandson." The revelation hit me like a truck. The man outside wasn't just a random federal agent. He was Captain Sterling's grandson. This wasn't just government bureaucracy trying to protect a reputation. It was a family vendetta. The Sterlings had been watching Vance for decades, ensuring his silence to protect their dynasty. The agent wasn't here to transfer Arthur. He was here to finish what his grandfather started. The danger hadn't passed. It had just become personal. "He knows," Arthur said. "He knows I have the other thing." "The other thing?" Sarah asked. "Papa, what other thing?" Arthur reached into his shirt, pulling out a chain that had been hidden underneath. Attached to it was not a dog tag, but a small rusted key. "The safety deposit box," he gasped, his breath becoming short again. "The evidence isn't on the tape. The tape is just the start." Suddenly the glass of the window shattered. A brick flew into the room, landing on the bed with a heavy thud. We all jumped. Attached to the brick was a note. I picked it up, avoiding the shards of glass. The note was handwritten, scrawled in angry marker. "Upload whatever you want. We have the house, we have the diaries, and we know where your daughter lives, Sarah." Sarah screamed. "My daughter! Emily!" She grabbed her phone. "She's at school." The threat had escalated. They weren't just trying to stop the truth. They were willing to burn everything down to contain it. I looked at Arthur. He was gripping the armrests of his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of grey. He was having a heart attack. The stress was too much. "Papa!" Sarah dropped the phone and grabbed him. "Help! We need a doctor!" The door burst open. The agents were gone. In their place stood two nurses rushing in with a crash cart. They pushed me and Sarah aside. "Code Blue, room 3B, the nurse shouted. I stood there helpless, watching them work on the man who had survived a massacre only to be besieged in a nursing home. The monitor flatlined. A high-pitched whine filled the room, louder than the storm, louder than the tape. "Beep!" "Clear!" The defibrillator thumped. Arthur's body jerked. I looked at Sarah. She was frozen, her hands over her mouth. I looked at the brick on the bed. I looked at the upload confirmation on my phone. The truth was out, but the price might be Arthur Vance's life. And the war he thought ended in 1952 had just claimed its latest casualty. I grabbed Sarah's arm. "We have to go," I said, my voice cold. "We can't help him here, but we can save your daughter." She looked at me, torn. "I can't leave him." "The doctors are here," I said, "but Sterling's grandson is out there, and he's going for Emily." Sarah looked at her dying grandfather one last time, sobbed, and then nodded. We ran out of the room, leaving the sound of the flatline behind us, running into a world that was suddenly much more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The tape was the match, but the explosion was just beginning. The drive to the elementary school was a blur of rain. Red lights ran through, and the metallic taste of adrenaline in my mouth. Sarah drove like a woman possessed, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the tires of her old sedan screeching against the wet asphalt. I was in the passenger seat, my phone glowing in the dim cabin. The upload had finished 10 minutes ago. The internet moves faster than justice, faster than the law. I watched the notifications explode on the screen. Twitter, Reddit, news outlets, the audio file of General Sterling ordering the abandonment of his men was spreading like wildfire. But viral fame wouldn't stop a bullet. We needed to get to Emily before Sterling's grandson did. "He won't hurt her in public," I said, trying to convince myself as much as Sarah. "He's a federal agent. He operates in the shadows. A school is too exposed." Sarah didn't answer. She just pressed the accelerator harder. We screeched into the pickup zone of Lincoln Elementary just as the final bell rang. It was chaos. Parents with umbrellas, yellow buses idling, kids in bright raincoats pouring out of the double doors. I scanned the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs. "There!" Sarah screamed. She pointed to a black SUV parked illegally near the crosswalk. Leaning against it was the agent, Sterling's grandson. He looked calm, terrifyingly normal in his trench coat. He was watching the stream of children, scanning faces. He wasn't looking for a suspect. He was looking for leverage. "Emily!" Sarah yelled, throwing the car door open before we even fully stopped. She sprinted through the rain, ignoring the honking horns. I followed her, my hand reaching into my pocket for the only weapon I had, my phone. I saw a little girl in a pink backpack wave at the agent, clearly recognizing him. He smiled, a cold, predatory smile, and took a step toward her. "Emily, wait!" Sarah's voice cracked with panic. The agent turned. He saw us. He saw the desperation in Sarah's face, and for a second his hand moved toward the inside of his coat. But then he stopped. He stopped because of the sound. It started as a murmur, then grew into a buzz. Every parent in the line, every teacher with a smartphone was looking down at their screens. Phones were pinging and vibrating in unison, a digital wave crashing over the school parking lot. The breaking news alerts were hitting. "War hero exposed. General Sterling's order to abandon troops leaked." The agent froze. He looked around. He saw a mother looking at her phone, then looking up at him with disgust. He saw a teacher whispering to another, pointing. The veil of authority he wore was shredded in seconds. I reached him just as Sarah grabbed her daughter, pulling her fiercely behind her back. I held up my phone, screen facing him. "It's over," I panted, breathless. "The world knows. Your grandfather was a fraud, and if you touch them, you're not an agent anymore. You're just a murderer." The agent looked at the screen, his face draining of color. He looked at the crowd, realizing he had lost the shadows he needed to operate. He sneered, a mask of arrogance slipping to reveal the scared child beneath. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "You destroyed a legacy." "No," I said, stepping closer, my voice steady. "I corrected history." Sirens wailed in the distance. Real police sirens, not his backup. The local PD, called by the hospital, called by the media storm. He looked at the approaching lights, then at his car. He spat on the ground near my feet, turned, and got into his SUV. He didn't speed away. He drove off slowly, defeated by the truth. We didn't wait for the police. We had to get back to the hospital. The drive back was slower, heavy with the aftermath of terror. Sarah held Emily's hand in the back seat, weeping silently. I checked my phone. The story was global. The army had already issued a statement saying they were investigating the authenticity of the recording. But the court of public opinion had already ruled. Arthur Vance was innocent. But as we pulled into the hospital lot, the sight of the ambulance bay chilled me. There were no lights flashing, just a quiet stillness. We ran to the 3rd floor. The hallway to room 3B was empty. The door was open. The bed was perfectly made. Fresh sheets, flat pillows, empty. Sarah collapsed against the doorframe, a sound of pure devastation escaping her lips. "No," she whispered. "We were too late." A nurse walked out of the room, holding a plastic bag with personal effects. It was Brenda. Her eyes were red. She saw us and stopped, her expression softening into profound sadness. "He waited," she said softly. "He fought so hard to wait for you." Sarah shook her head, sobbing, clutching Emily. Was he in pain?" Brenda shook her head. "No, he was peaceful. After the code, he woke up for a minute. He made me write something down." She handed Sarah a small, folded piece of paper. Then she turned to me and handed me the heavy, rusted key Arthur had worn around his neck. "He said, 'This is for the historian.' He said you know where to go." I took the key. It was cold, heavy iron. I knew exactly where to go. The First National Bank downtown, the oldest bank in the city, the one with the safety deposit boxes that dated back to the 1940s. We didn't go home. We went straight there. Sarah needed to know. I needed to know. The bank manager, seeing the news and our state, took us to the vault without questions. The box number corresponded to the number etched on the key. 402, the number of the battalion. My hands trembled as I slid the long metal box out of its slot. We took it to a private viewing room. The air smelled of dust and old metal. I looked at Sarah. "This is the final truth," I said. "Are you ready?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. I opened the lid. Inside, there was no money. There were no jewels. There was a single heavy object wrapped in an oilcloth. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a pistol, a standard issue M1911, but the grip was damaged, shattered as if it had been struck by something hard. And stuck in the barrel, jammed into the metal, was a bullet, a German bullet. Beneath the gun was a diary, a small leather-bound book with the initials EM embossed on the cover. Edward Miller, my great-uncle. I opened the diary. The last entry wasn't written in ink. It was smeared in blood, the handwriting jagged and failing. I read it aloud, my voice breaking in the silent room. October 15th. The captain is gone. Vance is here. He came back for me. I can't walk. My legs are gone. But Vance, he won't leave. He says he promised my brother. He says we go home together or we don't go home. He is carrying me. He is carrying all of us. If I die here, let it be known that Arthur Vance is the bravest man I ever saw. He didn't just fight the enemy. He fought the orders. He fought the devil himself to save my soul. I turned the page. There was a photo taped to the paper. It was a photo of a grave. A makeshift grave in a forest, marked with a cross made of 2 branches tied together with shoelaces. And standing over the grave, head bowed, was a young Arthur Vance. He hadn't left my uncle to rot in a ditch. He had buried him. He had performed the last rites while mortar shells fell around him. The gun with the shattered handle. That was the proof. I looked closer at the tag attached to the gun. General Sterling's sidearm, recovered from the mud. He tried to shoot me to stop me from going back for Miller. The German sniper got his hand instead. He dropped it. I kept it. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow. Sterling hadn't just ordered the retreat. He had tried to kill Arthur to stop him from saving the wounded. Sterling was a monster of the highest order, and Arthur had kept the gun not as a trophy, but as insurance. If he had revealed this 50 years ago, without the audio, without the context, they would have executed him for assaulting an officer. The silence wasn't just sacrifice, it was strategy. He waited until technology could prove the voice on the tape. He waited for a historian. He waited for me. He knew a Miller would come eventually. We left the bank in silence. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking, revealing a bruised purple sunset. The world felt different, lighter somehow, despite the grief. 2 weeks later, the funeral of Arthur Vance was held not in the small, neglected cemetery behind the nursing home, but at the National Cemetery. The story had become a global phenomenon. The president had stripped General Sterling of his medals posthumously the day before. The coward of Hill 402 was now the savior of the lost battalion. I stood at the podium looking out at the crowd. It was massive. Thousands of people, veterans from every war, Vietnam, Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, stood in formation, saluting. Sarah sat in the front row, holding the folded American flag that had just been presented to her, not by a sergeant, but by the Secretary of Defense. I adjusted the microphone. I had written a eulogy, but looking at the sea of faces, looking at the fresh white stone that read, "Arthur Vance, hero, beloved grandfather. The words on the paper felt small. I folded the paper and put it away. I looked at Sarah, then at the camera crews broadcasting live to the world. "We live in a world that is obsessed with noise," I began, my voice echoing over the silent hills. "We shout our virtues, we broadcast our lives, we demand to be seen. But the greatest measure of a man is not what he says. It is what he keeps inside." I paused, thinking of the compass, the tapping, the 50 years of staring out a window while the world called him a villain. Arthur Vance held a secret that burned him every single day. He let the world call him a coward so that his family could live in peace. He let his honor be stripped away to protect the memory of his brothers. He carried the weight of the truth alone, in the dark, for half a century. I looked down at my own chest, where I was wearing my great-uncle's dog tag, finally returned to my family. He didn't just save the men on that hill. He saved us. He saved our faith in the idea that honor still exists. He showed us that the truth is patient. It waits. It survives under floorboards, in rusted boxes, and in the hearts of quiet men. I took a deep breath. Arthur Vance was not a silent man because he had nothing to say. He was silent because the truth was too loud for a world that wasn't ready to listen. "Well, Arthur," I looked at the coffin, draped in the tricolour. "We are listening now, and we hear you." As the bugler began to play taps, the mournful notes drifting through the autumn air, I saw something. In the back of the crowd, standing under an old oak tree, was an old man in a wheelchair. He was wearing a faded uniform from the 402nd. He was missing a leg. He saluted. It was Jensen, one of the men mentioned in the letters. The man Arthur refused to leave. He was alive. He had heard the news. He had come to say goodbye to the man who carried him. I walked over to Sarah. She stood up and hugged me, burying her face in my shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave him his name back?" "No," I said, looking at the stone. "He gave it back to himself. I just held the microphone." We walked away from the grave as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the grass. I thought about the box in the bank, the tape in the cloud, and the piece in room 3B. The file on Incident 402 was closed. The footnote had become the headline. And as I looked back one last time, I swear the wind moving through the trees didn't sound like wind anymore. It sounded like a rhythm. Dot, 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 dash, 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 dot, dot, dot. But it wasn't SOS anymore. It was VVV victory.